Welcome to a new episode of Film Seizure at the Movies. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the Film Seizure podcast that you can catch each Wednesday morning with my cohorts Jason Oliver and Chuck Moore, and my solo show Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon. You can catch both of those shows at filmseizure.com. Now, we've got ourselves a little bit of a triple feature for this episode. We get things started with the science fiction action thriller from writers-directors Scott Beck and Brian Woods, 65, starring Adam Driver. Now, 65 is about an alien race somewhere out there in the cosmos, well before humans came along on Earth, who are spacefaring and explorers. We meet Adam Driver's Mills, who is discussing his latest job with his wife, Alia. Now, he's piloting an exploratory mission that will take him away from his wife and their daughter, Naveen, for 2 years. But the reason why he's taking this job to be gone from his family for so long is that their daughter has a potentially terminal condition that needs a cure, and the only way that they can afford the cure is for Mills to take the job that will basically triple his salary. So I guess space capitalism is a problem, folks. Now, while there is something interesting to explore there with how this quite advanced civilization having to pay for medical treatment for kids and so forth, that's not really what this movie is about. What this movie is about is what we saw in the trailer and all the advertisements for the movie, is that Mills' ship is damaged by an unexpected asteroid field, and the Charts didn't know about it. And the ship is forced to make a crash emergency landing on Earth 65 million years ago. At first, Mills believes he's the lone survivor of the crash, as the pods carrying the other people from his planet in cryogenic stasis are ejected as the ship is torn in half upon landing. However, he finds that there is one active pod still giving a reading, and he finds young Koa, played by Ariana Greenblatt. Now, Koa is from a different part of the planet from Mills, and therefore they speak different languages. This creates a little bit of a problem, as Mills isn't able to communicate with Koa, but the importance of their communication comes when Mills finds a way off Earth if he can get to another portion of the crashed ship. So at that point, then he has to figure out a way to communicate with her, usually giving hand signals, telling her basically what that means by repeating it. Like, you see it typically in a lot of other movies where you're dealing with people of different, with a language barrier of some sort. Now, the front-loaded portion of this movie is where you have that space capitalism, the sick daughter, and Mills not wanting to be rescued initially after crashing. However, once Koa is found, he changes his mind about being rescued to help her get back to her home planet. So here's where I can actually heap quite a bit of praise on the 65. The plot becomes exceptionally simple. Mills and Koa are in a hostile territory on a strange planet with no safe source of food. There are nasty bugs that will be sticky to crush or crawl into your mouth while you sleep. There are reptiles, dinosaurs, and all sorts of stuff, and they need to get 15 kilometers and up a mountain to retrieve the escaped capsule and pilot themselves off Earth. But there's more. Mills is hurt upon crashing on the planet. Koa needs constant protection because, well, she's a kid, and there's something in the sky that is getting larger and larger and will crash in a couple of days or so. So yeah, it's simple. Two people have to overcome a language barrier, traverse about 10 miles of territory, and do it all without being eaten or blown up by the asteroid. So yeah, sometimes simplicity can breed some blissfulness in a movie. While some of the more interesting stuff that you can really kind of sink your teeth into is found at the beginning of the movie, and it fades relatively fast from the plot, I really do just like the fact that this turns into a survival thriller. There are many times in which dinosaurs pop up and create a jump scare, and it helps give you a bit of shock to kind of keep you going throughout the plot. It's not overly done, but it's done just enough and the right number of times to where it's not constant fake outs and jump scares. Honestly, I know that I'm in the minority. The critics' consensus is not great on this movie. However, I am someone who enjoys a good creature feature that keeps things simple. There are people surrounded by dinosaur monsters. They attack. The people have to survive while trying to achieve a way out. Keeping things simple like that is not something that will necessarily appeal to many critics who think these types of movies needed to be left back in the 50s or 60s. But for me, this is something that is just what the doctor ordered for an easy, breezy 93 minutes of fun monster creature feature type of flick. So 65 gets a very affectionate B from me. It's a movie that benefits being seen in the theater, but I can also see this becoming a bit of a cult classic, especially for younger kids who see this and grow up remembering being scared by the dinosaurs or just liking seeing a guy shoot a dinosaur with the machine gun laser. But next up, it's a new year and it's time for a new Scream sequel. Now, I've admitted this sometime last year when I covered the previous Scream film, and I've talked about this when we covered the first Scream film on Film Seizure. I'm not a huge fan of this series. I was exposed to horror slashers and horror exploitation at an earlier age back in the 80s, so I often felt that the Scream franchise was, and I admit this is a bad take on my part, I know it is, so just hear me out. It just felt a little more like baby's first slasher movie when I had far past graduated, what scriptwriter Kevin Williamson was kind of giving out with The Price of a Ticket. Now, in the years since my smugness towards the franchise, I've cooled a bit and can say really many good things about the franchise, even if it's not really for me. It kept horror and slashers in particular going well past the expiration date of the late 80s for slasher films. And it also introduced people to horror from my quote-unquote generation. There are some slick and well-polished set pieces with good kills and situational setups to those kills. These are good things, and I wouldn't be surprised that some of the best horror of the past 25 years was made by people who really liked or were absolutely inspired by the original Scream film. So please understand that while I will not necessarily gush over any of the Scream films, and, I won't gush over them, even if I did have a good time at the theater, particularly with this movie, but and I didn't really gush over the fifth installment last year when I say it, but I can still say that Scream 6 is a good time at the movies or with friends if you miss it at the theater. On this sixth entry are new leads from the previous film, Sam and Tara, played by Melissa Barrera, and one of the hottest young rising stars of the last few years, Jenna Ortega, have moved to New York City, but they're past, and the dangers they face thanks to Sam's infamous lineage comes to haunt them. Already traumatized by the events of the last movie, it's difficult for the four survivors, Sam, Tara, and siblings Chad and Mindy, to know really who to trust or if they can even survive thanks to the rules of a franchise. Now I'll start with a few things that I feel like kind of dings at this movie a little bit. First, I still have a little bit of trouble connecting with a couple of the characters in the cast. One in particular is very difficult for me to really like. There are times the character says something funny or pointed that really does land. There are times I'm on board and I do generally care what happens to the character regardless. Yet there are other times where I just kind of want to say, whoa, let's calm down a bit and let's sit in quiet and just be cool. It's a type of character that kind of honestly wears me out. I do also think that a couple of the characters can die, but there seems to be an aversion to commit that murder by the writers or the people in charge of the franchise. Let's really kind of ratchet things up a bit. It's okay to add a little extra danger by saying, hey, you know what? One of our likable characters ain't going to make it through. But I digress. I also tagged who I felt were far more suspect than others as to who the killer or killers could be. and the reveal was a little less than spectacular because it retreads some stuff too. It's possible that the movie is being cheeky with legacy and having history rhyme or repeat, but it gets a tad sloppy. Also, I will say that the movie is also a bit too long. However, while some of those things that I just rattled off do hurt the movie to the point where I'm not exactly sure I really need to watch the movie ever again or need to feel like I'm keeping up with the franchise to prepare for the next entry that will inevitably come out next year or in a couple of years, I will say that there are some very good moments in this movie. The opening sequence for our cold open murder by Ghostface is not only features the lovely Samara Weaving, but it's well drawn out and does some slightly different things for a Scream movie, so I would definitely give high praise for that pre-title sequence. There is a very thrilling and gruesome attack by Ghostface that forces our heroes to cross an alley several floors up in an apartment building by traversing a ladder that's bridged between apartments over that alleyway. It's wobbly. There's a murderer busting through the wall. You're positive someone is not going to make it, and oh boy, do they not make it across. There's a subway scene that we got in the teaser or it was either a teaser or an early trailer that is very well shot and staged. That does make you nervous and a little claustrophobic. It also has a lot of character Easter eggs in the sub too. It ain't just the Scream guy in there, but Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Pinhead, the Shining Twins, and the Babadook are all also taking the subway to some Halloween parties. I also like that this movie takes place around Halloween, so you have reasons for people and multiple people to be wearing the Ghostface costume. And now there were probably other characters in that subway scene that I didn't catch too, but there's a really good scene with Courtney Cox finally having a showdown with Ghostface, and maybe for the first time it begins with Ghostface calling her, as he typically would his other victims throughout the franchise. She kind of gets a real moment of fending for herself on her own as well. So these are all good scenes that make this movie fun in the ways you want horror slashers to be fun. I wouldn't go into the movie expecting this sixth installment to be particularly smart outside of a couple of the kill scenes. If you expect this in the sixth installment or of any horror series to do that, you might be asking a bit too much from the genre. The best you can maybe ask for is whether or not it's fun. Scream 6 is fun. If you're enjoying this movie, even if there are some things you kind of want to, you kind of have to get past in order to get to the next attack. But simply between Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega alone, with some support from Dermot Mulroney and franchise veteran Hayden Panettiere, you do get sucked into what they're up to and you're having a good time. So what more could you possibly ask for at that point? Weighing several things like being sucked into the moments and enjoying the Ghostface attack scenes like I mentioned, as well as my general passive lethargic feelings for the series as a whole, and not sure if I really need to dive into the movie again at a later date, I am going to give this a very high C+. I might have liked this one a tad better than last year's entry, but I might be in a minority with that as well. Still, if you're a Scream franchise fan, you're going to have a far more nuanced take and understanding of where it really is good or bad than I will. Even though it might sound like I'm being only kind of so-so despite saying I had a good time, that doesn't need to be looked at as a negative review. I just may not be the best to really judge this against other entries in the series or other horror films. Our third film for this week, and we wrap things up with the new release that just comes out this weekend from Warner Brothers, New Line Cinema, and DC Comics, and that's Shazam! Fury of the Gods. When director David F. Sandberg brought the first Shazam movie to theaters right around 4 years ago, it was kind of a breath of fresh air. I had not been quiet about my disappointment with the dour, dark, at times unnecessarily mature themes and drama that came from the Zack Snyder-led DC films. Under his guidance, it felt like color and fun was sucked out of these characters, and I feel, with an exception to something like Batman, these characters kind of best when they can kind of bathe in the light and have a little bit of fun. In other words, Superman should be almost embracing what he is with a smile and swagger and do-good attitude. Wonder Woman shouldn't be muted in the horrors of World War I, although I do like her first film a lot. I just kind of had to accept that she was going to be in one of the worst wars in history based around what we were getting from Snyder's Superman films. So when it came time to adapt the Big Red Cheese, as he's called, I really needed the film to feel good and be mostly light in tone. And I felt that the first Shazam movie did that in spades. Yes, there were still some scenes with weight in them, and a particularly terrifying moment when Mark Strong's villain character used demons to kill a bunch of people. But still, Zachary Levi was a great pick for the heroic alter ego of Billy Batson. He kind of has this silly and goofy attitude to him anyway, and he looks like he's just having a blast in the character. That's definitely still on display here with the sequel. He's actually in his heroic guise more than as Batson, so Levi is getting a little bit larger lift than Asher Angel did as the kid version of Billy Batson. However, another member of the cast that still gets a lot of time and a lot of opportunity to win over the audience is Jack Dylan Grazer as Freddie Freeman. He is the kind of typical lovable loser, and he even has a love interest in this through Rachel Zegler, who is coming off her lead performance as Maria in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. Now, I will admit, I was coming into the sequel not super excited to see it. It's a movie that has been delayed, and while I did like the first one a lot, that didn't necessarily always mean I'm excited to go right back for more of the same. Sometimes with genre films, you have to expect more of the same in sequels. You're going to have Zachary Levi playing Shazam like he's a teenager and goofing off. You're going to have a lot of family drama and a lot of talk about having to grow up or live up to expectations and so forth. But here's the thing, though. With a few swipes that I can take at the movie, including Shazam really not showing any kinds of maturity in the 3 or 4 years time that's passed until he gets to the final act of this movie, and a groan-inducing drop of the Skittles slogan that feels really forced in terms of product placement, I gotta say I was won over yet again with this movie. Shazam! Fury of the Gods isn't looking to be The Dark Knight or Avengers Infinity War or Black Panther in terms of quality or weight. It just looks to be entertaining, and darn it, it charms its way into giving you 2 hours of something that you can really kind of have fun with. Again, we have a pair of villains played by Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu who they do some pretty scary stuff in the opening scene of this movie. They aren't messing around. People die in this movie, and yet it's still a light tone and fun movie. But as the movie plays out, we learn that they are the daughters of Atlas, and when their father and the other titans of myth were defeated and human magic wielders stole magic enough to imprison them, they're really kind of looking for revenge and regain the powers that were stolen. These powers were given by the old wizard to Billy Batson to become Shazam, and then he also shared those powers with his foster siblings to create the entire Shazam family, known to old farts like me as the Marvel family. So these sisters have a staff that can suck the powers out of the various heroes, and that adds a little bit of a thrill to scenes in which these mostly immature characters in these incredibly powerful bodies have to deal, they have to deal with these people while also having to fight these, for a lack of a better term, goddesses that are equal to their strength and bring some extra magical powers with them. And these sisters have a dragon that doesn't just breathe magic fire, but it also emits an aura that paralyzes humans with fear. Mirren and Liu are pretty good as these evil sisters. I like that they don't particularly care that they will essentially harm children. which makes up the Shazam family, and plan to destroy the Earth in retribution for how they were imprisoned 6,000 years ago. I like that while we don't really see why this happened, Shazam and his siblings are not well liked by the city of Philadelphia. They're given a negative nickname as a team. They're heckled on the streets. It's clear just by how they carry themselves that they're not great heroes. But at the same time, we see a pretty good scene of them trying to save people from a collapsing bridge. So their hearts are definitely in the right place. They do have cohesion issues, as Billy in particular wants the team to always work together. This rubs Freddy the wrong way because he kind of wants to get out on his own and spread his wings. Mary wants to go to college and get a job to help the foster parents. It's not working too well, but as the family is attacked, they have to figure out a way to work things through. And that's really where this movie kind of shines. That and one very funny scene with Helen Mirren reading a letter written by a magic pen. Basically Shazam is dictating this letter so that they can meet to kind of hash out whatever the problem is. And so he's dictating to this magic pen what to say, and it writes down everything he's saying, even when he was talking to his brothers and sisters. And her reading through that actually gave me a pretty hearty, loud laugh at the scene as it was playing out. So that is the one scene from this movie that's great. But generally speaking, it's a fine film. I liked it probably more tonight than I will later, and might even only remember a few specific moments from this a year from now. But I do like these characters and how they try to resolve their issues where they lack from not being particularly mature or even a cohesive unit as a team. That even ultimately plays into the villains too. So there are some mirroring that isn't badly sprinkled across the story. It's actually kind of nicely, showing them as two sides of the same issue. So I would give this a soft but charmed B grade. A couple of last notes about Shazam! Fury of the Gods, though. I worry that DC and Warner are a little concerned about how this film will ultimately perform. It might be because Black Adam didn't perform all that well back in October, or maybe it's because the DC Extended Universe films that are still due to come out before the start of the projects that, sadly, James Gunn will ultimately be unfairly blasted for by the Zack Snyder fanboys. These movies are kind of zombies in the grand scheme of the current shared universe. But the marketing of this movie, just the day or two before its release, started advertising that Wonder Woman appears in this movie. There's a fake out with that in an earlier scene, but what they are showing in the commercials comes right at the end of the movie. The film was advertised for about a full year because it was originally due to come out last year, but pushed to this spring. I went months and months and months without seeing or having it tip its hand that one of the bigger characters would make an appearance in the movie. Sure, there's lots of references to the other heroes, and yes, there was a Superman sort of cameo at the very end of the last one. But what did they do in the final days of the marketing push? Fumbled the bag and revealed Gal Gadot's presence as a cameo. That left nothing for me to be surprised by. Worse, it derailed a kind of heavier, more dramatic moment because I knew from the commercials what was coming. And it just kind of sucks. And that's something the marketing team made a decision on, and I have no idea why they did that. But I do have to say, something that constantly kept me interested while the movie played out was how many times my favorite baseball team, the Philadelphia Phillies, played into the story. One of the Foster siblings is getting into baseball with the mom while she watches and cheers on the Phillies. The kids, who have turned the Rock of Eternity into their private headquarters and hangout, have Phillies hats and jerseys all over the place. A big plan of the Daughters of Atlas plays out in Citizens Bank Park, where the Phils play. So that was all great and probably helped keep me won over throughout the entirety of this movie. Overall, these three movies are an enjoyable time at theaters, with 65 probably being the one that would most benefit from being seen in a dark theater on a big screen. Scream definitely appeals to fans of the franchise, and Shazam! Fury of the Gods is a charming superhero comedy with some particularly fun moments. So, again, a fairly good time at the movies. 65 and Shazam! Fury of the Gods get a B. Scream 6 gets a C+ from me. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so you can be made aware of new episodes of our various shows as they drop. You can also follow us at podcast providers like SoundCloud, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and Audible. You can also listen to the show on YouTube by subscribing there. I'll be back in April with a little bit of a Halloween celebration 6 months early. So until then, don't forget to save me the aisle seat.